My shoes squeaked on the scuffed linoleum as I hurried down the hospital corridor, breath shallow and tight in my chest. The air bit cold through the cheap vents, sterile, reeking faintly of antiseptic and the quiet panic that lingers in hospital walls. Even after all these years, those walls still found ways to amplify voices, mine most of all. I passed nurses in powder blue uniforms who barely glanced at me. I must have looked frantic and disheveled. Matthew, my mother's voice shot through the corridor, shaking with equal parts fury and fear. I turned just beyond the closed door to my father's room, to her lined face pinched with exhaustion and grief. My sister Camille stood behind her with folded arms and eyes that darted between the floor and my face, as if dreading my response. I steadied myself. The last time I had been home was 2 years ago, for Christmas, a graceless affair where my ambition soured every conversation, every meal. Now I had returned to Paris not in triumph, but in the shadow of my father's heart attack. News had spread fast, a phone call in the middle of prep during a rainy afternoon service, my knife clattering on the cutting board as I heard my mother's voice break apart. My mother closed the distance, lips trembling, her words like stones. "So now you come after all this time." Her anguish was ripe raw in the fluorescent light. Where else would I be? I barely recognized my own voice, thinner than I wanted. She drew herself up chin high. "You could have been at his side these last years. Instead you," she choked on the words, "went chasing your ridiculous fantasies. Chef in New York. You could have had a real life here with us." The corridor trembled between us. "Mama, I called every week, Midnight," she cut in, voice trembling. "Always at midnight, like we were your obligation. Because you were always working, always in that damned city. What do you have to show for it, Matthew? Have you made anything of yourself yet?" I glanced at Camille, looking for an ally, but her expression was distant. "You missed Pap's birthday, his retirement, you missed everything." I squared my shoulders, feeling shame and defiance war in my chest. I wanted to shout that I'd been building something, sacrificing for a dream they never understood. But in that cold corridor my defense tasted bitter. "It was never just about New York," I said, my voice a whisper. "I had to prove to myself that I could do something with my hands, Mama. With my heart." She pressed her hand to her temples as if I was the cause of her migraine. "And has it worked? Do you have a restaurant, or are you still chopping onions for someone else?" I said nothing because the answer still felt small, even if I knew it was enormous, the risk and what I was becoming. I wanted a chance to explain. I wanted them to understand that the dream wasn't just playing dress-up in a toque blanche or flipping crepes for tourists. It was about feeding people something real, something that could heal or conjure memories. But my voice had deserted me, and she had already turned away. I sat at my father's bedside, afternoon sun slicing through faded curtains and painting the sheets pale gold. Machines beeped rhythmically by his head. Above them, Pap looked smaller than I remembered, his cheeks hollow, wisps of white hair flattened along his brow. For a long while I just listened to the sound of him breathing. "I heard you out there." His voice was papery, but the mischief of old still lingered under the rasp. "Still fighting with your mother, nothing changes." I managed a crooked smile. In my strongest memories, he used to stand just like me in kitchens, though his were always family, never commercial, rolling dough for tarts or frying bacon while teasing us. "I never wanted to go, Pap," I said, rubbing the stubble on my chin, "but I couldn't stay either, not after what they said." He reached for my hand, surprising me with the force of his grip. "They're afraid. People don't like what they don't understand. But you," he took a breath, wincing slightly, "you were always spitting out dreams like cherry pits, didn't matter if they got you in trouble." I looked at our joined hands, the years marked into his skin with mottled blues and yellows from IV needles. "They called me crazy," I said, "all of them." "Yes," he whispered, "but your mother makes a mean coq au vin, and I have yet to see her give anyone courage. You want to make something real, you'll have to pay for it." That night, as the city pressed against the windows, lights flickering on narrow streets, I thought about what he said. I watched him sleep, remembering how he'd guided me through chopping onions as a boy, never rushing me, letting me make mistakes. I imagined him younger, standing in the kitchen of our cramped apartment, humming old jazz songs while stirring sauce. Paris smelled different that night, sharper than I remembered, gasoline and geraniums, baking bread and river water. My old room still had faded posters of footballers taped to the wall, and the lingering smell of cumin from the time I'd burned a pot of rice at 14. I tried to sleep, but memories kept surfacing. I kept seeing myself at 16, admitting one trembling afternoon that I wanted to be a chef, not a lawyer or a doctor or a banker. My Uncle Gene had laughed so loud the windows rattled. "Maybe you can wash dishes for a president," he'd cackled, and everyone howled and slapped their knees. Mammon had pursed her lips, embarrassed, and talked about stability. Camille had just looked away, cheeks flushed. The next day, my cousin Simon uploaded a picture to our family group chat, a cartoon chef with a donkey's head stirring a pot of mud. I had packed my bags for cooking school a year later, the day after Pap gave me his paring knife, his only gift. Service was held that first year and the years after too. I scrubbed pans in kitchens where the floors never dried and the chef hurled plates when you missed a garnish. I moved, and I rose, cracking oyster shells, baking bread at dawn, weeping in the bathroom after a service so brutal I thought I'd never cook again. I fell in love with a pastry chef, lost her, sprained my wrist, had nights where I ate scraps standing in walk-in freezers. I got promoted, prided myself on brulees so delicate you could tap the surface with a spoon and shatter it like glass. But every time my hands bled, every time my body ached with exhaustion, the laughter from Paris echoed in my head. Ridiculous, my mother's word, thrown at me like a stain I could never wash out. When my green card was approved, my chef in New York held out a battered apron with quiet ceremony. "You earned this," he said, "make something of it." It was not my name above the door yet, but I fed critics, served celebrities, got mentioned in reviews that traveled across oceans. At Christmas, I wired home money instead of returning, afraid of the same old sneers and the weary, disappointed sighs. As the years passed, a new dream took shape, smaller perhaps but more solid. I wanted to come home, not just as proof of survival but as someone changed. When Pap was released from the hospital, I stayed. My mother was careful, wary, still testing the distance between us. Our home dinners quieted by his frailty, the unspoken question always present, had I wasted my years? One evening, Pap asked for something special. "I want your tarte Tatin, Matt. The one from your restaurant." I hesitated and his eyes twinkled just so. "Don't be afraid, your mother can help." I assembled ingredients in the old kitchen, in sight of sun-bleached curtains and chipped tile. My mother hovered nearby, silent at first. The kitchen felt too tight for both of us, her world, not mine, but I moved with the memory of cracked eggs and warm sugar, hands steady, mind tracing every step. Butter melted and sizzled. Apples caramelized and rode up in sticky steam. She watched as I rolled the pastry, not correcting me, just observing. The silence warmed. At last, as I slid the tart into the oven, she murmured, "You still have your father's touch for dough." I smiled. He taught me everything I needed to know. That night my family ate my tart in a hush, forks tapping porcelain, eyes wide. Even Camille licked her plate clean and later slipped an extra slice onto her own. No one spoke, but something in the air softened. Word of my return leaked, as gossip in Paris always does. My old school friends, Simon and Luke, invited me out for drinks. I accepted, heart pounding. The bistro was cramped and loud, lamplight wavering over wood tables, glasses thick with condensation. Even after a decade in brutal kitchens, I found myself dreading their jokes. For a while we reminisced about secondary school, old teachers, childhood haunts. Then Luke leaned in, smirking. "So, chef," he said, raising his glass, "is it true you cook for film stars now or just American tourists?" I bit back a retort. Simon picked at a plate of frite. "Did you hear about cousin Leia? Her bakery did 20 cakes for the mayor's son." "They say you came crawling home because you failed," Luke said lightly, but his eyes held a challenge. I set down my beer. "No, I came back for family. I did what I set out to do." Luke looked unconvinced. "But anyone can chop vegetables, eh?" "Yes," I replied quietly. "But not everyone can build something that lasts." They grinned, nudged each other, then returned to the comfort of their jokes. I finished my drink in silence. Weeks blurred together as my father recovered. I cooked for him, for my mother, for Camille, who started bringing friends by under the guise of casual visits. One chilly Saturday, Pap sat at the window, reading the paper with a faint smile. My mother called to me from the kitchen, voice low and urgent. "There are some men here, suits for you." Confused, I wiped my hands and walked down the hall, only to be confronted by two strangers, stern, businesslike, speaking polished English and accented French. They introduced themselves as partners for a restaurant group I'd once staged for in New York. One handed me a letter. It was an offer, legitimate and final. I unfolded the paper, hands trembling. They wanted me to helm a new restaurant, here in Paris, backed by their name, my menu, my principles. They needed proof of concept. If I was willing, they wanted me to host a pop-up for their investors in the city the following weekend. I looked at my mother, at her doubtful, searching gaze. My answer seemed to balance on a knife's edge. "I'll do it," I said. The next days were a blur: phone calls, menu planning, exhaustion. My name was on the invitations this time, alongside theirs. Camille asked if I needed help. My mother, unasked, began washing vegetables, setting out flour. "Will you," she hesitated one morning, knife in hand, "cook the tarte tatin again?" I nodded. The kitchen bristled with nervous energy, a heartbeat thrumming under my ribs. The night of the pop-up, I wore my chef's jacket for the first time in Paris with pride, a gift from my New York chef, the left sleeve embroidered with my initials. We set up in a gallery downtown, white walls sparkling with shadows cast by chandeliers. I worked with two sous chefs I'd invited from my years abroad, the kitchen in full display behind a glass wall. The guests filed in, murmuring, investors in sharp suits, food journalists with notepads, even a few familiar faces from the cafe crowds of my youth. Toward the back of the hall I saw Luc, next to him Simon. And my mother, arm in arm with Camille, and my father, cane in hand, expression unreadable. Behind the glass, heat radiated from the burners. The scent of caramelizing onions, roasted lamb with rosemary and butter filled the space. My hands moved on instinct, plating, saucing, tasting, directing. Waiters ferried dishes out under silver domes, plates returned scraped clean. There was a rhythm to it, a dance I had memorized with every sleepless night, every disaster survived. After dessert, people applauded, smiling and shaking hands. The investors circled with compliments. The critics scribbled notes. My heart thudded in my chest, but even the praise could not drown out the thrum of anxiety. Had my family understood? I looked to the back where my mother stood. She hurried toward me, her eyes shining with something fierce and proud I hadn't seen since childhood. She gripped my shoulders. "You did this." And from behind her, Luc stepped forward, his joking smile absent. "I didn't know," he said, searching for words. "I thought you were pretending, but people were saying this was incredible." Simon nodded, hands shoved in pockets, eyes a little red. "The restaurant, it's yours, you're leading them here." I nodded once, unable to speak. My father smiled slowly with the pride I'd always hungered for. Camille drew me into a hug. "Do you know what the papers will say tomorrow?" she whispered. "Do you?" I shook my head. I didn't care, because here, in this moment, the city that once mocked me now held me close. My ridiculous dream had become a night none of them would forget. That winter, I opened the gilded door to my own restaurant overlooking the Seine, my name on the glass, my mother's portrait above the kitchen pass. Pap and Maman dined every Thursday, Camille bringing friends and bragging about her chef brother. Even old Luc found his way in, sheepish and smiling, every time a foreign client wanted to taste something spectacular. Sometimes, late at night, I'd step outside and look at the city, lights shimmering on dark water, the smell of pastry and river mingling. I remembered every laugh, every wound, every moment I'd thought about giving up. I owed it all to this place and to the people who doubted me, because their disbelief forged the fire in my chest. At family dinners, Pap would tap his cane, eyes bright. "Our Matthew cooks for the world now." And my mother, whose love had always bewildered me, who'd feared I'd be lost, reached for my hand across the table and squeezed it tight. "You brought it all home, Matthew," she whispered. "You made us believe." In the end, it wasn't conquering New York that marked my success. It was returning to these faces, this city, with my whole heart, unafraid, undeniable at last.